Hey guys, and welcome back to Rebooted MCU. I'm going to jump right into things. This is Phase 2, Part 2 of Rebooted MCU because although we only have 3 projects to get through today, there are some pretty long ones. So I want to jump right in. I want to, first of all, thank you guys for all the support on the series so far. Again, I'm going to probably be dedicating most of my time moving forward to Rebooted MCU. So it's in large part thanks to all of your positive reception and feedback. So again, we have 3 projects to close out our rebooted Phase 2. And I'll talk a little bit about how I'm going to do Phase 3 at the end, but let's jump into the first project, our 5th project of the rebooted MCU Phase 2. So first up, we have Ant-Man and the Wasp Nano Battle. So the movie opens with Tony Stark talking in front of an audience at a fundraiser about someone who he's describing as intelligent, creative, and hardworking. He adds that when he says hardworking, he truly means that he never stops working. Tony pauses for laughter and says, "It is now my honor to introduce to you the chairman of Pym Technologies, Hank Pym." Of course, played by John Krasinski. We see Hank walk up on stage and Tony sits down next to Janet, played by Emily Blunt, who whispers to Tony, "Thanks for doing this. We owe you one. By the way, you are not joking about his work habits." Hank talks about all the technological advancements his Pym particles have made in the areas of sustainability, access to resources, and energy around the world. Hank says that the next innovation from Pym Technologies is what he is calling the Highly Intelligent Robotic Protective Task Force. Stark yells out from the crowd that he should shorten the name. Hank explains that the task force will have all the powers of the Ant-Man and will be able to protect Earth so the Avengers won't have to. Janet looks concerned and tells Tony that she has major concerns about this, but Stark loves the idea and says if anyone can figure out how to do it, it would be Hank. Later that night, we see Hank hard at work in his lab, and Janet comes in to tell him that he has worked enough and needs to spend more time with her. Hank stops and tells her, "Honey, the reason I am working is so I can spend more time with you. Once the task force is ready, we can spend every minute of every day together." Janet pauses and asks, "So, the reason you want to end the Avengers is because of me?" Hank pauses and tells her, "No. Tony and I have been talking, and based on what happened here in New York a few months ago, we truly have no clue what is up there. I may be a genius, but there is whole other worlds, galaxies, and cosmos up there, and we have an infinite number of threats, and zero way to ensure that we can counteract them." Janet looks concerned, but decides not to say anything. She walks away. Hank says, "I'll be to bed soon, my love." The camera then pans, and we see a short crate recording the conversation between the two. Cut to the next morning where we see Hank reading the newspaper with the headline, "Mass Vigilantes Stop String of Robberies in Hell's Kitchen," with a man wearing a black bandana covering his eyes dressed in all black on the cover of the paper. Hank asks Janet what she is watching on the television where a bald man is giving a press conference. The man in question is Darren Cross, the CEO and founder of Cross Enterprises, who's played by none other than Corey Stoll, who says that while Pym Technologies might have their sights set on the future, Cross Enterprises is the present and unveils the Yellowjacket Army. Cross explains that the Yellowjacket Army is small, nano-sized robots who are 10 times stronger and more durable than the average soldier. He explains that suits can be worn by soldiers or simply act on their own, being AI controlled. Hank is furious at this revelation and tells Janet they need to pay Cross a visit. We see Cross giving an interview at the outside of Cross Technologies as Hank and Janet drive up. Hank confronts Cross on the technology and how he is able to replicate the Pym particle. Cross plays it off for the camera and tells Hank that he doesn't need to worry because they are both fighting for the same purpose: bring the world peace. Hank and Janet return home, and Janet tries to console Hank, who's growing more and more frustrated. As the two enter their home, they feel the presence of someone else. As Hank clenches his fist, we see none other than Nick Fury sitting at the dining room table, reading the same newspaper Hank was before. Nick Fury continues reading and says, "A super soldier is found frozen on ice. A mass vigilante is stopping robberies all over Hell's Kitchen, and the particle that is seemingly impossible to duplicate has somehow been duplicated and is being mass-produced." Hank screams at Fury and says, "You're behind this, aren't you?" Janet tells Hank to calm down, and Nick Fury chuckles, saying, "No, but I know who is." Hank pauses for a second and looks at Nick Fury intently. Fury stands up. "Your old pals at AIM, that giant floating head, finally cracked and told us. You left them, but you didn't think to protect yourself. They had control of your files, Hank. All of them. The PIM particle structure, the designs for your little robotic task force, the mechanics of your suit. They know you." Before Fury can finish his sentence, we see Hank grab a briefcase sitting near the door and rush out. Janet screams for him to stop, but Fury tells her to let him go and that they need to talk. We then see Ant-Man break into Cross Enterprises and discover the Yellowjacket room, where we see Ant-Man become surrounded by thousands of AIM workers in Yellowjacket suits, with Cross also wearing one, telling Hank, "Well now, so glad you could join us." We then cut back to Janet and Nick. Nick tells Janet, "Look, I didn't get to finish what I was going to tell Hank. The issue extends larger than just the PIM particle. Pym and Stark might be doing good by the world now, but they are leaving vacuums." "Vacuums?" says Janet. Fury continues. "Stark stopped his weapon selling business, and the thugs and terror groups are looking for a new supplier. AIM has funded Cross, and now Stark's void has been filled. Not only that, but AIM knows everything about how the particle operates, as well as Hank's techniques, as well as yours." Janet looks concerned, but her demeanor quickly changes, and Fury replies, "You don't look as concerned as I thought you would be." And Janet exclaims, "I have to run." Janet then goes to the basement, where she finds a prototype suit that Hank has been working on for her. It is similar in design to the classic Wasp costume from the comics. We then cut back to Ant-Man getting kicked around by Yellowjacket and the other AIM soldiers. Wasp arrives to help him out, and this is where the movie gets the title of Nano Battle, as Wasp and Ant-Man have to shrink down to deactivate the central control system and fight Yellowjacket suits along the way. This leads to a final confrontation with Ant-Man and the Wasp facing Darren Cross, whose suit was not implicated by the central control system shutdown, and Wasp shows off the power of her new suit. She grows giant, and we see Hank cheering with joy as his idea finally worked. Yellowjacket is defeated and is taken to the raft. Cross Enterprises is shut down, and we cut back to Hank and Janet at the kitchen table, with Hank holding a newspaper that reads, "Ant-Man and the Wasp stop microscopic robot takeover." And Hank tells Janet, "You know, the morality of humans is fickle as they come," which is exactly the reason we need my robotic protection force. Janet asks Hank how he is sure that the same thing won't happen with his creation, and he reassures her, "Don't worry, my robots will have one focus: protect the world at all costs." And the only post-credit scene in Ant-Man and the Wasp Nano Battle is Tony Stark and Steve Rogers showing up at the Pym household and telling Hank and Janet they need to suit up because they have located Hydra's new base in Sokovia. So that's Ant-Man and the Wasp Nano Battle. Again, we reuse Yellowjacket. I think this story is a little bit more creative. Again, I sort of gave a lot of lead up, but again, there's a lot of stuff that happens in the actual battle at Cross Technology or Enterprises. So, I'm going to try to fill those in with some fun visuals for you guys to look at while watching. But just wanted you to know, for most of these stories, when we get to the action sequences, just know there's going to be a typical Marvel battle in those sequences. I'm not going to go in depth unless there's something important that happens during the battle. So that's Ant-Man and the Wasp Nano Battle. Again, we have 2 more projects to get through, so let's move on to the next one. The 6th project in Rebooted MCU Phase 2 is Avengers Age of Ultron. Now, a lot of the movie stays the same, but I'm just going to highlight what is different based on the previous projects we've had so far. So at the start of the film, the Battle of Sokovia still includes Iron Man, Ant-Man, Wasp, Captain America, Thor, and Black Widow. Now, Hulk isn't here because Hulk is still missing following the events of Rampage of the Hulk. We see Wolfgang Baron von Strucker abandon the Mind Stone, telling the Hydra soldiers, "Make sure we get to safety." He also tells them that their new experiments will eventually guarantee the return of the stone. Strucker escapes with these experiments, who are being kept in capsules, and the Avengers recover the Mind Stone. Now, probably the biggest change, or one of the biggest changes of the film, is the fact that Wanda and Pietro are not present. I know that's probably going to upset some of you, but trust me, their stories have a much bigger impact on the overall rebooted MCU and future projects, so don't be too sad that they're not present in this film. So once they recover the Mind Stone, instead of having Banner and Stark work on Ultron, Pym and Stark use the Mind Stone to create Ultron, who is still voiced by James Spader. He heeds the words of Hank from the end of Nano Battle, of having the sole purpose to protect the world at all costs, and determines that as long as the Avengers are around, the only way to stop harm to the entire world would be to destroy it, as it would ultimately be more humane to end everything at once than avoid a millennia of additional pain and suffering brought on by the Avengers' consequences. So the movie occurs similarly after this point until we reach Wakanda, where Ultron and his drones attack and kill King T'Chaka. This leads to T'Challa ultimately taking the throne and officially taking the mantle of Black Panther. He then joins the Avengers temporarily as in a truce to stop Ultron. Vision is ultimately created, and he knows while harm might still occur to the world, a world without the Avengers, or life, is more harmful as a whole. As the Avengers head to Sokovia to stop Ultron, we see one Bruce Banner watching the news about the death of King T'Chaka, and he walks away. The Sokovia battle stays the same, with the first set of heroes fighting Ultron include Iron Man, AntMan, Wasp, Captain America, Thor, Black Widow, Black Panther, and Vision. When S.H.I.E.L.D. arrives, both War Machine and Hawkeye join in the battle. At one point, it appears that everyone is being overpowered and hope is being lost when suddenly a massive scream is heard and the Hulk comes rampaging through Sokovia, saving his friends. This is where we get the Avengers Assemble scene. The ending of the movie stays the same, except that some characters go in different directions. Iron Man still quote-unquote retires, Thor leaves Earth again, Hulk disappears following the battle and goes back into hiding, Black Panther returns to Wakanda, but not before Captain America gives him a place on the team. Hank and Janet also say they are taking a step back, but will be on standby if needed, and Captain America leads the new Avengers, which include Black Widow, Hawkeye, War Machine, and Vision. And we also have a post-credit scene. It's the same one with Thanos saying, "Fine, I'll do it myself." So that's Avengers Age of Ultron. Not too many big changes. Again, we get Black Panther in there, and no Wanda and no Pietro. But again, overall, sort of the same film with a few changes here and there. And wow, typically AntMan would come after this. As you know, this is rebooted, so we have a new project coming after this. So let's jump into that project right now. The seventh and final project of Rebooted MCU Phase 2 is SpiderMan. The movie opens up with two figures standing in a graveyard. The figures turn out to be Peter Parker, still played by Tom Holland, and May Parker, played by Marissa Tomei, looking at a gravestone which reads Ben Parker. May comments, "I can't believe it's already been 2 years." Peter is visibly upset and says, "Yeah, it still hurts." "Hey, I meant to ask you, Uncle Ben, the last time I saw him, he told me..." Just as he's about to finish, May interrupts him and says, "Let's finish this later. You're going to be late for school, sweetie." She gives Peter a hug and watches as he runs off. We see Peter arrive at Midtown High School, where he greets Ned Leeds, played by Jacob Batalon, at his locker, and they talk about finishing building their Lego Death Star set that night. As he says that, Michelle Jones, otherwise known as MJ, played by Zendaya, overhears him and says, "Parker, don't forget about academic decathlon tonight. Might not care, but it's sure the only thing I care about." Parker notes, does she ever have anything positive to say? Then see Parker and Leeds go to their homeroom, where their homeroom teacher reminds them that the Internship Fair is happening today during lunch break, and that students should make sure to attend. We then see a glimpse of Peter's day: biology, math, and English. We then cut to lunch break, where we see Peter and Ned enter the gymnasium, and we see a lot of tables set up with different internship opportunities. A brutish kid bumps into Peter as he's leaving the gym. The kid turns out to be none other than Flash Thompson, who's been recast as Ted Lasso's Phil Dunster, who says, "Watch out, Parker. I'd clobber you, but I got the best internship here, so I don't want to leave a bad impression on Mr. Osborne." Peter notes to Ned, "Remind me to steer clear of that internship." We see Peter and Ned walk past multiple tables, until a table catches Peter's eye. Table has a small homemade sign which reads, Nelson and Murdoch, Attorneys at Law. And we see none other than Franklin Foggy Nelson, played by Eldon Henson, passing out pamphlets. Ned bumps Peter and says, Nelson and Murdoch are the best. They helped write my Nana's will. As Peter begins to walk towards the table, Mr. Harrington, Peter's biology teacher, quickly grabs him and says, Peter, come with me quickly. I need you to meet someone. Mr. Harrington leads Peter to a man whose back is turned to the screen as he's talking to another student. Mr. Harrington says, Mr. Osborne, this is Peter Parker. He's a top of the class in biology, robotics, and mathematics. The man turns around and is revealed to be Norman Osborn, played by William Dafoe, the president and founder of Oscorp, who says, well, Mr. Parker, it's a pleasure to meet you. I actually want to extend an offer to you off the bat to join our internship program. It is math and science intensive, so you'd be perfect for one of our slots. Knowing that Flash had already accepted an offer, Peter says, I actually have another opportunity in mind. Osborne quickly says, come on now, son. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. It's a joint collaboration between Oscorp and Stark Industries. Peter stops and turns around. Stark Industries? As in, Tony Stark, Iron Man? Laughing, Osborne says, the one and only. I'll tell you what, don't make up your mind just yet. Stop by Oscorp Tower this evening around 5 and hear about the opportunity for yourself. We are working on genetically modified animals which could help prevent diseases around the globe. And he hands Peter his business card. Peter runs back to catch up with Ned and tells him, so, I'm going to see what this internship is all about after all. Apparently Tony Stark, the Tony Stark, is going to be a part of it somehow, and the two walk out of the gymnasium. We jump to Parker standing outside Oscorp Tower later that day. Looking at the business card, he says to himself, MJ's going to kill me for missing practice tonight, but I can't miss this opportunity, and he walks in the building. As he walks in, we see Flash Thompson and 3 other students standing with Osborne who says, Mr. Parker, glad you could join us. We're about to begin our presentation. Please, students, follow me. Flash whispers to Peter, looky, looky. I guess I'm going to have some fun in this internship after all. We see an oddly colored spider climbing the top of the ceiling and following the students into the next room. Norman Osborn stands in front of the students and says, welcome to the joint Oscorp-Stark Worldwide Sustainable Initiative. Here we're working on a few projects that will seek to improve human life around the world by enhancing animal biology. Using radiation to enhance spiders to be stronger and more capable of protecting gardens from pests in Africa. An innovative strength serum on cows that will improve the quality of meat for consumption in India. And DNA notification in dogs here at home to make them stronger, faster, and more durable to protect the men in blue. As Osborn is talking, we see the spider drop down and land on Peter's shoulder. Osborn stops and says, well, I can't be the only one to talk about this. Students, please welcome everyone's favorite Avenger, Mr. Tony Stark. As Tony Stark enters the room, the spider bites Peter on the neck and he yells, ouch! And Stark smirks, says, ouch! That might be one of the worst ways I've ever been greeted entering a room. Peter starts feeling woozy and almost faints, when Flash punches him in the shoulder and says, wow, way to blow it before the internship has even started, Parker. Peter notices, however, that the punch didn't feel like much of anything. Peter completely zones out of Stark's speech, but is brought back to reality when he hears someone saying, hey kid, and looks up to see none other than Tony Stark reaching his hand out and saying, besides being creative with your enthusiasm when I entered the room, I hear you're a brilliant kid. I hope you choose to stay with us. Peter shakes his hand but notices his grip feels a lot stronger than normal. Stark is visibly in pain and says, yikes kid, you got quite a grip. You should play baseball or something with a grip like that. Peter stares at his hand and leaves the building. As he walks away, he notices that he is moving a lot faster than he did previously. We see Parker arrive back at his apartment. It is a small apartment that is not in the best condition. When he walks in, we hear Aunt May talk on the phone saying, Mr. Ditkovich, I promise we will have the rent on time. It won't be a repeat of last month. When May sees Parker walk in, she moves the phone away from her ear and says, hey honey, Ned is in your room. Peter nods and goes to his room where he sees Ned finishing the Lego Death Star, and he tells Peter it only needs one more piece, and I've been holding it for you to place. Ned hands Peter the final piece, and as he goes to place it, The force of the placement causes the entire Death Star to fall apart. Peter jumps backwards so high that he hits his head on the ceiling. Ned says, "Dude, what? How? Why?" Peter responds, "Dude, I've been feeling weird since I got bit by this spider earlier." "Oh gosh." "Ned, Mr. Osborne said the spiders were exposed to radiation. It was a radioactive spider. It has to have been." Ned is visibly shocked and says, "Oh my gosh. You have powers. Like Iron Man. Oh wow, do you think you could introduce me to Black Widow?" Peter tells Ned to calm down and says they still need to figure out what all his powers entail. He looks at his hands and Peter says to himself, "It's meant to be. I can finally live up to what my Uncle Ben told me." As Peter's about to finish his thought, Aunt May calls out, "Peter, Ned, pizza's here." We then cut to a compilation of Ned and Peter attempting to figure out what all of Peter's powers are. This includes him breaking concrete slabs, jumping super high and getting caught to the ceiling, attempting to run up the side of a building and falling, then attempting to climb up the building and succeeding, and wearing a blindfold and having Ned throw a dodgeball at him, with it hitting him in the back of the head. We also see Peter and Ned researching spiders and their webbing. This cuts to Ned and Peter making a webbing mixture in biology class, commenting, "Let's test it." We see multiple failed attempts at making a durable web until attempt number 18 works. We then see the boys working on a launcher in robotics class. And the compilation ends with Peter being able to successfully shoot a web from the launcher and stick onto a building. The story then shifts to Norman Osborn in the middle of a board meeting. We see a chart showing that the numbers are steadily falling for Oscorp. The chair of the board of directors tells Norman that the board has become increasingly concerned with Oscorp's performance, and that if Osborn continues to lose the money company, they'll be forced to strip him of all operational duties as president. As the board members leave, we see a man in a suit walk up to Osborn. The camera pans up, and this man is revealed to be none other than James Wesley, played by Toby Leonard Moore, who whispers to Norman, "Improved publicity using Stark, a foolproof good faith plan to better the world, and multiple generous loans from my employer to save your face. And yet here we are." Norman looks angrily at Wesley and says, "This is the last time I take money from a mobster from Hell's Kitchen. Get out of my face." Wesley grabs Norman by the shoulder. "My employer is losing his patience. The mass vigilante is continuing to cause our shipments to be delayed. My employer requests the strength serum, or being ousted from Oscorp will be the least of your concerns." Norman glares angrily at Wesley, and as he walks away, he calls for Mencken. Donald Mencken, played by Colm Feore, enters the room, and Osborn tells him to call Dr. Strom immediately. We see Osborn and Mencken take an elevator down to a laboratory where we encounter Dr. Mendel Strom, played by Ron Perkins, who says, "Mr. Osborn, I must say your cover-up of having this formula being produced for usage on bovine was particularly clever, but the formula is still in its early stages." Osborn looks at Strom and says, "Give it to me." Strom looks at Osborn and chuckles, "Sir, the serum is still not complete and hasn't even been tested." Osborn screams, "I don't care. Give it to me now. If I die, I die. I'm 6 feet under already if the psychopath in Hell's Kitchen doesn't get it next week anyway. Give it to me now." Shaking, we see Strom prep Norman for the strength serum, a slimy green-looking substance, and he subsequently administers the serum. Norman looks dazed at first, but once his eyes become focused on Strom, he glares at him and grabs his neck. We hear a crack. A lab assistant screams as Norman breaks the restraints and leaps towards the assistant, breaking his neck. Mencken stands shaking and says, "Sir?" Norman turns in his direction, calms down, saying, "Mencken, it worked. Now clean this up." We cut back to Peter, who is lying down on the top of his apartment building looking at the moon. We then see Ned come onto the top floor holding a red piece of cloth. Peter looks up and Ned says, "My Nana finally finished making the mask." Peter takes the mask and thanks Ned. Ned asks him if he's finally sure if he's ready to become a superhero. Peter does some self-introspection and says, "I'm not sure. I am doing this for more than just me. I'm doing this for Ned, for Aunt May, for Uncle Ben. But I'm not sure if I know exactly what I'm doing. I keep thinking back to what Uncle Ben said." "Name?" Ned blurts out and breaks Peter's train of thought. "What's your superhero name?" Peter looks confused and says, "I really haven't thought about it." Ned suggests that they call him the Arachnid Kid, but Peter scoffs and says he needed to work on that one a little bit more. Peter puts on the suit, which is similar to his homemade suit from Spider-Man Homecoming, and Peter says, "Ned, before I start this journey, I need you to promise me that whatever happens, you will not reveal my identity to anyone." Ned nods in excitement and says, "Does this mean I'm your manager?" Peter laughs and says, "Sure, something like that," and we see Peter swing across New York during night for the first time. We then cut to a garage where Norman and Mencken walk in. Norman comments, "Who said knowing Stark would not have its benefits?" And we see a holding unit housing recovered Chitauri tech from the Battle of New York. Mencken asks Norman what exactly he's doing. Norman stops and says, "I have worked all my life to get where I am, and there are people all around me who want to take it away. I started Oscorp with the sole intention of helping the world, but instead I've become a laughingstock, having to call on some pretty spoiled rich kid brat, a demonic mob boss, to bail me out. No more. Power, my dear Mencken, is about asserting it absolutely, never losing your grip. I now have more power than any one man could possibly imagine. I plan to never lose my grip. I have bigger aspirations than just Oscorp. I want New York to feel my grip." He turns to Mencken and says, "Now, we get to work." We then have a montage shifting between Peter in his costume and Norman. Peter is doing things such as rescuing a cat stuck in a tree, stopping a robber from stealing someone's bike, and pulling a car to safety after a crash on a bridge. Newspaper headlines flash up talking about Queen's new superhero, calling him names such as Tarzan, Wonder Kid, the Arachnid, and Rope Boy. We also see Norman building his glider, making bombs, and finally constructing his Green Goblin helmet. We also see goons coming to collect the strength serum, and we see Norman in his Green Goblin costume kill them all. We catch up to present day about a month later, where we see the board of Oscorp. They arrive and they are waiting for Norman to arrive to vote him out as president. Norman arrives and looks deranged. The chair of the board stands up and Norman says, Now, gentlemen. I've seen the writing on the wall, and I'm going to give you all the opportunity to resign." The board members look confused, and one begins to laugh. "Funny, is it?" asks Norman as he walks up to the board member and grabs him by the neck. "I'll show you funny." Norman snaps his neck and begins jumping around, killing the members of the board. We see him suit up in his Green Goblin costume and fly around on his glider, dropping bombs all around New York. Green Goblin yells, "Absolute power," and sets his sight on Stark Tower. He says to himself, "If you want to assert power over those beneath you, you must destroy that in which they hold sacred." We cut to Peter and Ned talking about how Peter can't actually be considered a real superhero because he hasn't defeated any big supervillains yet. Peter tells Ned that he didn't start fighting crime to become a superhero, he did it to protect those he loves. Suddenly, we hear Flash Thompson call out, "Hey dweeb, maybe it's a good thing you never joined the Osborne internship. Check out the news." Ned pulls out his phone, and we see a live video of the Green Goblin flying around with the headline, "Oscorp building attacked. Mass criminal targeting Stark Tower." Ned looks at Peter and says, "Dude, supervillain!" And we see Peter take off to change into his Spider-Man outfit. We cut back to Stark Tower, which is being hit with tons of bombs by Green Goblin. We hear Tony say, "Friday, remote access to Mark 45. Friday says, "Mark 45 is unavailable due to massive damage sustained during the Battle of Sokovia, sir." Stark mutters to himself, "I really gotta invest in some nanotech." As he says this, Green Goblin crashes through the window on his glider. Stark uses a hand repulsor, but it has little effect on the Green Goblin, who lands on top of him. Green Goblin says, "In order to make the people fear you, you must kill their false idols." As Green Goblin prepares to strike Tony, his hand is trapped by some webbing and is pulled away. Spider-Man comes face to face with Green Goblin. Oh goody, the Spider Kid has come to play. We then see Spider-Man and Green Goblin fight, and the fight is pretty even until Green Goblin throws a bomb at Peter, who is able to use his webbing to throw the bomb back at Green Goblin. It explodes and destroys his mask, revealing Norman Osborn. Peter stops and says, "Mr. Osborn?" Norman begins talking to Spider-Man about everything that has gone wrong with his life. As he does this, his glider flies behind Peter and prepares to strike him. Then see Peter's senses begin to tingle, and he does a backflip and uses his webbing to catch the glider. As he flips, however, his mask flies off, revealing himself to be Peter Parker. Norman begins to laugh. Ah, the brat that thought he was too good for Oscorp, huh? Peter is panting, looking at Norman holding the glider, and Norman says, "Go on, boy. Kill me. Or I'll make sure everyone you know and love suffers the consequences of your action. I'll start by strangling your dear Aunt May Parker, and then your friends and everyone you have ever cared about." See Peter begin to get angry, and prepares to strike Norman with his glider, killing him. We then have a flashback to Uncle Ben, who's played by Henry Winkler, saying, "Always remember, Peter, with great power comes great responsibility." Peter drops the glider, grabs Norman by the throat, and says, "No, I won't kill you. I shouldn't. But in return, you're going to make sure nobody knows who I am, and you will leave me and my family alone. Got it?" Peter then punches Norman, knocking him out, puts his mask back on, and carries his lifeless body out of Stark Tower, where the police, firefighters, and paramedics are waiting. On his way out, Tony Stark walks up to Peter, who's still in costume, and says, "Hey, can't thank you enough for all your help. What can I call you anyway?" Peter smiles and says, "SpiderMan." He hands Norman to the police, and he swings away. We see thousands watch as Norman is carried away from the scene, and a newspaper headline the next day reads, "Osborne taken to the raft. Spider-Man is the new hero of Queens." We cut to sometime in the future, where we see Peter standing alone looking at Uncle Ben's grave. He says, "Thanks, Ben. As long as I'm Spider-Man, I'll try to heed your advice." We hear a notification from Peter's phone. It's a text from Ned that reads, "Robbery at the old bakery." Peter smiles, puts on his mask, and swings away. Now we get to the post-credit scenes, and there are two post-credit scenes. The first one shows Tony Stark visiting Peter's apartment and tells him that he figured out his identity using the security cameras at Stark Tower, but that his secret was safe with him. He does say, however, that Stark has some friends who might need his services in the future, and also says that he has a little gift for him. He hands Peter his first and new upgraded Spider-Man suit. In the second post-credit scene, we see attorney Matt Murdock sitting in his law office listening to a news report about the Spider-Man. Matt talks to himself saying, "The Spider-Man of Queens. Huh. I guess I'll have to pay him a visit. See what he's all about." And that is Rebooted MCU Phase 2. Thank you all for watching. So just to let you all know, Phase 3 has about 13 projects in it. It's the end of the Infinity Saga, but I'm assuming that it will probably take me 4 or 5 episodes to get through all of them. So expect about maybe 2 or 3 projects per episode. We'll see how things go, but just want to give you all a heads up. Phase 3 is going to be a little bit longer, but I appreciate you all watching. Please make sure to leave your comments on what you thought about the stories down below, and I look forward to seeing you in Phase 3 Part 1. Take care.